So, as a young trailblazer in a country like Lesotho, does the budget speech affect you in any shape, form, or way? How does it impact your budget, if you will? In today's conversation, my guest is a trailblazer of note who is committed to using his experience and, of course, influence for the betterment of Lesotho and her people. A patriot, an investment analyst, Teboho endeavors to make a meaningful contribution to pension and the investment industry in our country. He currently serves on a number of boards, for example, the Lesotho Employers Pension and Provident Umbrella Fund, and of course, Kick for Life. And of course, outside of all of those endeavors, he enjoys playing golf and of course loves, I say it, of course, a lot. I'm nervous, don't mind me. He also has a lot of interest in entrepreneurial pursuits. Ladies and gentlemen, our conversation today focuses on the 2024-2025 budget speech presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Development Planning a few weeks, in fact, last week, as it were. So our conversation today really just tries to unpack what this means for the country, what the insights and key takeaways are, and of course, how it affects us as trailblazers. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Teboho Mphana. Hello, good sir. Good evening. Good evening.
Evening, sir. How's you? Shabu.
Hello.
No,
Are you
great.
feeling nervous? Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling relaxed?
Very nervous. I'm not one to be in front of the camera. So
It's interesting that you are not one to be in front of the camera, but you're like, how to break a budget speech?
I don't know what got into me.
Well, whatever that is, we love it. We love it, love it, love it. So welcome to My Money Adventures podcast. For people who don't know you outside of the profile that you got on Teboho Mphana.
Yeah, so I did see a notable exclusion there.
Okay, notable.
That I'm a renowned Arsenal fan.
Oh.
That I am happily married.
Ooh.
I was told to say that one. So
Okay. Told or coerced? Which one?
well, let's say I've said it.
Told. Okay.
And so I'm quite excited to talk about the budget. Hopefully, we can try and demystify it, make it a bit simpler for our trailblazers.
Trailblazers.
Yeah, I was practicing that.
Yeah, the whole time. fellow trailblazers.
Yes, so that our trailblazers can get a sense of it, be excited about it, and hopefully at the end of this, they will want to get up and go get themselves a copy of the speech and then go through it themselves. Yeah.
I love it. I think there's one thing that you also forgot to mention. The one thing that makes you and I also special is the fact that we are tax of nicks.
Yes. I don't want to mistake that. Tax of nicks, tax or nothing. That's what it translates
Tax on
to.
nothing, yeah.
Exactly.
Tax of nothing.
Sure.
All right, cool. So before we get into the conversation, let's do a quick icebreaker. You are an investment analyst. What's your relationship with money?
So I've got
Current relationship with money.
my current relationship with money.
Yeah. Well, if you want to share the
No, man.
past, you can also. Let's
No,
simplify it. What's your
I've
general
had
relationship with money.
My relationship with money has always been good.
Okay.
It was good from the time when I had to budget what we're talking about. R1 every day for a week.
R1.
Yep. Every day of a week I used to get a buck a day.
Okay.
So I was able to budget that, buy myself some baby guns and stuff. Set up some businesses. So I've always had a very interesting relationship with money, but it hasn't been an abusive one. I don't abuse money, and it hasn't abused me thus far.
So when we say abusive, how do you not abuse money and how does it not abuse you practically?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So I've always understood sort of how money works. I've always understood that, like I told you now, I had a rand or a lute to spend a day. And I always understood that if I wanted to buy more things, then I had to spend less than a lute a day. That's something that I still do today. You're a big advocate or proponent of paying yourself first. I do that every time. And I do it particularly when I get salary increments, which is not too often. When I do get those, I make sure that the payment to self is always done first. That way I find myself avoiding taking unnecessary debt or bad debt, as you always call it. Sure.
Love how you also say it, as you always say it. Okay, cool. So the Minister of Finance and Development Planning presented her budget speech a few days or weeks ago. Some of the Trailblazer members don't necessarily always see the importance, the budget speech. So in your view, what is it? Why is it important for us to know, be aware, and talk about the budget speech?
Sure. So our budget speech, if you think about it, you are big on personal finance, so the channel is very big on personal finance. It's a similar topic, just an extension of your own personal finance. We always struggle on budgeting. And so this is just simply a personal budget, but from a country's perspective. And the same reasons why it is important for you to budget on a personal basis is the same reason why a country must budget at a national level, and the same reasons why you must make sure you go through your budget is why you need to understand how your country budgets. Take it in a way to say, in your household, particularly when you were much younger, your parents had to have budgeted, and it was you may not have realized it, but it's in your best interest to know where that budget goes, because part of them budgeting, whether good or bad, will inform whether they're able to buy you the shoes you want, they're able to take you to the school that you want, they're able to buy the car that you can be proud of when you get to school. Right? So in the same light, you need to understand what the government is doing so that you can understand where this tax money that you are paying every month, 25% roundabout, if you take the 20% and 30%, that you are paying every month to the government. Now it's important for you to understand where it is going. And so that if you are in a place of influence, you can actually even influence where that money actually goes. And then end up getting that nice car, or in this case, good public transport. In this case, getting good infrastructure, good roads and stuff like that.
Healthcare.
Sure.
Healthcare. All right, cool. So now that you've laid the foundation, I think we are ready to get into the actual conversation. So I've been to a lot of events, weddings, funerals, a lot of those, and definitely a theme, and I've come to realize that themes have a story behind them, So bringing it back to the budget of 2024, the theme for 2024-2025 budget year is building resilience, fostering growth. What does this mean? What's the storyline behind this, and where does it come from?
Sure. So for you to get an understanding of the current theme, you need to look back at the previous year's theme, which really focused on reconstruction and recovery. This was, I think, a play of words by the government of the day, revolution, and so everything started with a re. So it's reconstruction and recovery for growth and resilience. And so what you now have with this one, we're saying, look, let's build that resilience. And there's an emphasis there of saying, let's work together. And by that, they mean let's work together, both public sector and private sector, so that we can have a sustainable and fair growth. So it's just a continuation of last year's budget, which was the first from the government of today's current administration. Sure.
And I'm a firm believer, in order for you to know where you're going, you need to know where you come from.
Sure.
So if we are talking 2024, 2025, maybe we also need to also look back at 2023, 2024.
Sure.
So in just a short review, a brief review, what are some of the key highlights that you picked up from the 2023-2024 budget?
Thanks. So when I was explaining myself, I forgot to make a very important disclaimer. What we're having is more of a conversation. This is by no means an economics lecture. I'm by no means an economist. I did study economics for 3 years.
I did it for first year.
Yeah.
Second year, I was like, no, this is not for me.
I did the full 3 year at undergrad. So what I am is not an economist, but I am trained in reviewing financial statements, budgets, and all of that. So I'm a trained consumer and user of those information. What I'm going to try and do, or at least what we're going to try and do through this conversation, is to try and get some insights, try and get some information from a lot of noise, political rhetoric, political hyperbole that you'll find that is on the 27 or 30 pages that we have in our budget speech. So I wanted to lay that foundation to say I'm not an economist. Mine is just to try and take out what is important.
What's in black and white, sure.
Yeah.
What's important. I appreciate that, yeah.
So your question was, what was your question again?
Highlights from 2023-2024 budget.
Okay. So the 2023-2024 budget is an interesting one. Because what it does, if you look at it, is it gives you a first look in terms of the current government, which I think is on its second year now, to say they had set out a plan to say this is what they're going to do. And this is now the plan through the budget of them executing that. And what we see in there is whether they were actually truthful to that. And so what you wanted to look is to say, it's important to understand what did they put in that initial budget to say, this is what we're going to look at, this is what we're going to do. Part of it was we are going to try and restrain spending, or at least inefficient spending. So it's important that as we do that review that you talked about, we look at what they set out to do and what it is that they've actually done. And so I'll have to look.
No problem. Please.
I'll have to look just to make sure that I don't leave out anything that's important. If we are to look at last year's budget, I think the most important thing that we have to take from that budget was for the first time in a long time, we had a budget that was quite ambitious and that set out to have a surplus. Typically, when we budget as a country, in fact, even as we budget as individuals, it's very difficult for us to budget for a surplus. This is why oftentimes when you do a budget, and when I do a budget, and all our trade players do a budget, we always say we can't invest because there's nothing left.
Or save.
Yes, so there's nothing left to save or invest. So in this case, what they'd set out is they'd set out to say, look, over the 2023-2024 year, they're going to look to raise in revenue about 25.1 billion, and they're going to spend about 24.1 billion. But what actually transpired is quite interesting, is that they spent they gained in revenue about 23.5 billion, which is 1.6 billion lower than what they'd set out to do. But more interestingly, what they spent is about 21.6 billion, which is about 2.5 billion less.
Okay.
So in terms of revenue, if you want to look at that, they've collected 6.4% less. But in terms of expenditure, they've been able to curtail the expenditure and spend about 10.4% less, which as a result, the actual surplus that they got, instead of 1 billion, it was in fact, it's projected to be 2.2, because we're still in this 2023-2024 financial year. So it's projected to be about 2.2 billion, which is 1.2 billion more than what they'd budgeted when they started.
Did you know that over 40% of employed Basotho earn less than 2,500 per month and often make uninformed financial decisions? Join us and we will help you navigate the complexities of managing finances. Imagine tailored financial solutions and transformative educational programs designed to eradicate financial uncertainty. We aren't just consultants, we are dedicated partners accompanying you on your journey to financial freedom. TKO Financial Wellness, where your success is our decisive victory.
Okay, great. Personally, I think that is great insights.
Sure.
Great insights. And it kind of lays the tone for the 2024-25 budget, So in your view, looking at the budget speech as well, what is the tone and what are the priorities, emphasis for the 2024-2025 budget?
Sure. So I'll get to your question just now.
Sure.
I listened to myself just respond to your last question. And I'm thinking what we are trying to do is demystify the whole conversation. So I found myself blocked down into a lot of numbers,
yeah.
And I'm worried that we may live behind one or two of our fellow trailblazers.
I love how you bring that fellow trailblazers.
No, we have to.
The trailblazers.
So I think what I want to do, leading on to initial question at some point around what this budget thing looks like, is to come up with I've got like 4 or 5 terms that I want to just define.
Okay.
Just quite simply to say, as you go through a budget, as you listen through a budget, you're going to hear people talking about GDP, growth in GDP. You're going to talk about inflation. People talk about fiscal surplus. We just talked about it now.
Fiscal deficit as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fiscal year, financial year, all of those. So I think it's important that before we get into the meat and potatoes of the budget and the themes and all of that, we sort of lay that foundation to say, look, when we are talking about a GDP, a country's GDP, we should think of it in our personal setting as something sort of a net worth. This is sort of to say, look, what is your level of economic activity as a country? That's where GDP comes from. In full, it's gross domestic product. So as a country, what are we producing effectively?
Okay.
So you're looking at that to say, what do you have as a country? That's the simplest way that I look at it. And the way these economists, and I said I'm not one of them, that they compute GDP or gross domestic product, they use one of 3 ways. I find expenditure to be the most intuitive. In this case, what you're looking at is to say, look, let's take a sum of all households. How much are they spending, right? Then let's look at business. How much are they spending in terms of capex? And then let's look at government. How much is it spending on goods and services? You add all of those things together, and you also add a third component, which is net exports, or simply to say, what you're exporting less what you're importing, because the idea is to understand that as a country, how much are we producing? So that's GDP. So a lot of times that sort of speaks to what is the financial or economic position of a country. And so people don't usually talk about GDP, but they talk about GDP growth, because that tells us how much are we growing. In personal terms, it would be, is your net worth growing? That's the most important thing. The number of where your net worth is not so important, but so much is it growing, and at what rate is it growing? So that will be GDP growth. And then the next aspect that we need to speak to would be inflation. I think this we speak to even when you do your personal finance lectures all over the place. This is the increase in the cost of everything. So that's generally what that is. The general increase in prices over a 12-month period.
A loaf of bread was 10 rand, whatever, 2 years ago. Now it's 15 rand or 12 rand, 12 maluti.
Exactly.
2 years ago, now it's 15 maluti 3 years later.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So that's also quite important, because as we calculate GDP, which is the previous aspect, we talk about it in nominal terms or in simple terms. So we're saying we're adding up, oh, this is 12 rand. Né? But what is important to follow through is that to say, but how much is this worth? Like what we are producing today, how much is it able to purchase for us today? So people will then talk about terms such as real GDP. So they'll take your nominal GDP, which is your normal GDP or your simple GDP, and then subtract inflation, which is the general increase in all of those prices, and then you'll get your gross domestic product, which is now your real, if I go back to my net worth, your real increase in purchasing power, right? So that's what that is. And then fiscal year, fiscal deficit, that's just a fancy way of people that are in the industry. They want to close you off. If you're talking about a fiscus, you're really talking about CCU. You're talking about a bucket to say, this is how much we have in the coffers. That's a fiscus. A fiscal year and a financial year is really the same thing. This is what we use to say the 12-month period in which governments and countries budget for tax purposes and all of those. That is called a fiscal year or a financial year, which is a bit different from a calendar year, which is our January to December. In our case in Lesotho, we are looking at it to say we know that our year starts on the 1st of April financially.
Assuming they know.
Well,
These trailblazers. Yeah.
Our trailblazers are smart because what happens is even most of our employers, most employers also try and align themselves to that, and then they'll know that they get increases on the 1st of April.
On the 1st of April.
Yeah, so that's the beginning of a new year.
There's one thing that I miss since leaving my corporate job is that increase and the bonuses. Yeah. Anyway, let's continue.
Let's not talk about bonuses in this club.
Hey.
Sure.
I miss them nonetheless. Whether it's 1,000 Maluti, that's a story for another day, but I miss it. Yeah. Yeah, cool.
So that was the context.
No, I appreciate.
Hopefully that helps.
No, I appreciate that because I think oftentimes as finance professionals, yesterday you said that you're not a finance professional. You are an investment manager,
an investment professional.
Investment professional. Okay. As finance and investment professional,
sure,
we often tend to use a lot of jargon and we leave a lot of people behind. So
I don't think. But by the way, I don't think it's a finance thing. I think if you listen to doctors, even their handwriting is exclusive.
Yeah, I've seen that. I didn't want to get into that because
so I was just saying for the finance and investment people, we're not the only ones.
We're not the only ones. Yeah. So what we're basically saying is let's stop using jargon and let's use simple language that everybody can. Let's communicate effectively.
Sure.
Cool. All right. So the question that I wanted to ask as we're building up to, in fact, the question I was asking was, what's the tone and the emphasis for the 2024-2025 budget?
Sure. So it's interesting. I made a disclaimer. I don't want to make too many disclaimers. We are going to talk about the budget. We're not going to try and be political.
Sure.
In any way. So what you get and comes out very strongly. And I was fortunate enough to be at the budget speech dinner as well, where the ministers were unpacking the budget even more. The emphasis that you got from the Minister of Finance and Development Planning in this case is they are magnifying the role of private sector as they speak, and all that they're saying is, which is also aligned to something that we'll talk about a bit later, hopefully. They are looking to magnify or put more emphasis on the role of private sector in terms of getting us to sustainable growth and also getting us to job creation. So what the tone has been set is to say, look, we as government for too long we've been playing the starting role. That is not the role of government. Our role as government is to facilitate, to make sure that for private sector to then flourish. So what you get as a theme or as an emphasis from the budget as you go through it is that emphasis to say we need private sector to lead our job creation and to lead the sustainable growth that we speak about. Sure.
So when you speak about private sector led, the role of the government, I think it's also important for us to also appreciate the environment and the context we operate in, the surroundings, if you will. How Sheba the macroeconomic landscape currently, what does that look like? And what are the key insights that you've picked up from the budget speech itself?
Sure. So I thought we just agreed just now that
not an economist
that we're not going to talk about. We're not going to use jargon. Use a very big, bombastic word, macroeconomic.
I apologize, trailblazers.
So effectively, what you're saying, and I'll be a translator today.
Sure, please.
Effectively, what you're talking about is to say, look, from a global standpoint, from an economic perspective, how are things looking? So we're not looking at it from a single country. We're not looking from a single town, from a single city. We're saying, let's look at it at a bigger picture. What does the landscape in which you're operating? We all understand that if you are in marketing, the environment that you're operating in is very different from someone that is in agriculture, which is very different from someone who's in mining and all of that. But there are some of those aspects that are overarching and affect all of us, regardless of the industry that we operate in. So that's what you meant, and fellow trailblazers. See, I want
stumbling all over it. Yeah, but it's fine. Fellow trailblazers. Yeah.
I didn't know that was a tongue twister, by the way.
So it is a tongue twister.
So that's what we're looking at. So the question is, very simply, is it summer? Is it autumn? Is it winter? Is it spring? It doesn't matter what industry you're in. if we're in spring, it's cold, right? Not spring. If we're in winter. It's cold. If it's spring, flowers are blossoming. Now, what then becomes important is some of us will enjoy the springtime. Some of us will like springtime more. And in the case of a budget or in the case of a productive setting, some of us as businesses do better in a winter or in a summer. If I'm selling Speedos, for example, I don't look forward to winter, right? So really, when we're talking about macroeconomic outlook, we are trying to understand is what's coming. Is winter coming, as they used to say back in the day? Or are we looking at summer? And so should I be buying shorts or should I be buying a blanket? And so what we're saying is, and what we've seen is in the past year, global economic growth was sitting at about 3.1%, which is that aggregate of GDP that we talked about earlier, to say from the gross domestic product, well, in this case, it's not domestic because we're talking about on a global setting, how that grew. It grew by about 3.1%. And it is expected that we're going to get a similar 3.1% in the current financial year, which if you look at this pre-COVID, these are low numbers. But when you see where we're coming from, then we welcome any gain that we'll get. What we are seeing is, or what these experts, the economists amongst us, what they say is, from a global perspective, they expect that in the next financial year in which this budget sits, global economic growth will be about 3.2%. So it's just a slight nudge from the 3.1 that we'll be experiencing this year. And if you look at it from a sub-Saharan perspective, which is where we find ourselves, we're looking in 2023 at about 3.3%. And then for the current financial year, we're looking at 3.8%, which is slightly higher. And we are optimistic that as we move forward, as we move further away from the impacts of COVID, as we move further away from the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war, which is still ongoing, by the way, that things will look better because now there are workarounds. We used to struggle to get wheat. There used to be issues around energy prices. And so those things affected not just those countries, but even us down here in Lesotho. So from that perspective, sub-Saharan African growth for 2025 is expected to be at about 4.1%. Now, in Lesotho, the story isn't as great. We are still struggling along. We're looking at 1.2% for 2023. We're looking at 1.4% for the current financial year. And we're quite optimistic for 2025. We think we're going to do really well. We're going to get a whopping 2% growth. A whopping 2% growth. Now, I also want to, we talked about nominal growth, real growth.
Yeah.
So I want to align that also with the inflation figures as well. Our trailblazers will know, got it right. Our trailblazers will know that in the past couple of years, you talked about bread earlier, the prices shot up quite significantly. In 2023 in Lesotho, we experienced inflation at about 8.3%. In the same year, we grew at 1.2%. So if you're going to look at it in real terms, did our economy grow? The answer is no. So if you're looking at 2024, globally, we're looking at about 5.8%. That's the inflation. That is slowing down. In Lesotho, we're looking at 6.4, which is significantly less than the 8.3 that we looked in 2023. And we expect this to continue to slow to about 5.5 for Lesotho, 5.5% for Lesotho in 2025 and 4.4% globally. So it's still tricky. We're looking to grow in 2025 at 2%, a whopping 2%. But inflation will be at about 5.5%. So if you're looking at real GDP growth, that will still be negative, about negative 3.5%.
Yeah.
So that's the context in which we are operating in. But that's macro. So we don't necessarily have to be all doom and gloom just based on what's happening in the macro perspective.
Sure. So we don't want to be doom and gloom at that level. Looking at bringing it closer to home, what are the key drivers for the growth or key sectors over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so things are looking good. I need to make another disclaimer.
We love these disclaimers. We need them.
I'm a cup half full type of person, not half empty. So what we are seeing is, you'll remember that a couple of years ago, our mining sector, which is one of our big driving industries, it was left to what you call skeleton staff. Like these key people. Those are the only people that were left operating those mines. Just because if the mines weren't operational, then they would not. If you were to close down those machines, then the cost of you starting everything up would make it unfeasible for you to operate that mine. So what we are seeing now, we are seeing a resurgence in activity in our mining industry. And I remember, I think maybe it's a week or two ago, we got a couple of announcements from Litseng where they were announcing some significant diamonds that they found. So we're seeing a resurgence in that as an industry, which is important for us in a number of ways. One, we are a shareholder in the business, but also Litseng is a taxpayer. So we get both dividends and we also get a lot of taxes from that, which is quite significant. But I think what most of us will look to and what many of us see as the biggest driver of our economic growth going into the future is what is happening in and around Pudihadi, phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. So what you're going to see there is a significant uptick in terms of the construction industry, which is really going to drive our industry. You are in the property space. I'm sure you've got one or two spillovers from what's happening there, and I'm sure one or two of our trailblazers as well. If you find yourself lucky enough to own a house or have a rental somewhere where it's attractive for these people that are going into Pudihadi, where they get to stay. And so these are now spillovers. These people bring their families with them. So that's also good for tourism, because a lot of what this industry does is it brings a lot of expats. It brings a lot of foreign professionals. So when they come in here, they don't only come by themselves, they come with their families. And so much as the construction industry is going to experience the direct uptick, but even all the other ancillary industries in and around general life are going to see a significant uptick from that. Our service industries, I know our banks are loving the project.
I've got a few friends in banking and they're just smiling all the way, and March is bonus season for them, so It's looking very nice for them.
So those will be our drivers as we move forward.
Sure. There's a quote that, I don't know if you mentioned the quote, but there is a quote by Cornelius that says, "Action without planning is fatal, and planning without action is futile." So a common mistake when we are developing plans and drafting strategies is the misalignment between the implementation, the priorities, and of course the strategy itself. In our context, looking at the budget speech for 2024-2025, is there alignment with the National Strategic Development Plan 2? Number 2. It's number 2.
Yep.
And is there alignment between that? But before you even get to that alignment, what is, for people who don't know, for trailblazers who don't know, what is the National Strategic Development Plan? Just at a very high level.
I did say I'll be your interpreter for the day. So for those of us that are in corporate, we know that our companies have strategic plans. Typically these take between 3 to 5 years. These sort of set a direction of where we are trying to go over the next 3 to 5 years. And then once we've got those approved as our direction, as our true norths, what you then tend to get is on an annual basis, we'll then budget on the basis of trying to achieve or realize those objectives that we set out in our strategic plan. So this is NSDP 2, or National Strategic Development Plan 2. This says that there was one before that, which wasn't covered in all of glory. Because what we saw, so I'll just bring a bit of context to say what that is. So effectively, in what I've just said, is that is a national strategic plan. So effectively, all the words that it's national, so it's at country level. Strategic, it's more long term. Development in terms of how do we go from A to B, and then it's a plan. So this is what we have set out over a in our case, the NSPD is a 5-year plan. So we had our first NSDP. We had our first one, and what was important in that one was there's a finding which was found to say there was a significant misalignment between what that proposed, which is what our plan was, and how we were budgeting. There was a significant misalignment. So as the country or as the government of the day then set out to do NSDP 2, yes, which was scheduled to run from 2018-2019 financial year to 2022-2023 financial year, which is a five-year period. The idea was there needs to be an alignment. Unfortunately, March 2020, maybe or 2 years into the plan, everyone shut down and everyone went home.
Lockdown.
Right? And so things weren't as we expected. So fast forward to 2022, 2023, when we expect to see the final results of the plan, we haven't done much. And so what has happened is the current government, when it was faced with the decision whether to look to establish a new plan or whether to see through the initial plan, they thought this is quite a good plan. And so what has happened is we've had an extension of the NSDP 2. So ordinarily, we would by now be on NSDP 3, but we're still on NSDP 2. Simply because the government has said, look, this is a very good plan. And to your point, if you fail to plan, that's fatal. Or if you act without planning, that's a fatal exercise. But it's quite important now to say, to your point on Cornelius, to say, but you also must act. So what we wanted to see in this budget, and to your question to say, and in the previous budget as well, is to say, are our budgets in sync? Are our budgets aligned with the strategic plan? In a similar sense to say, when you do your budget as a corporate, is it aligned to your strategic plan? When you do your budget as a household, is it aligned to the ideals or goals and aspirations that you have as a family or as a household? So I think in this case, fortunately, we've got a resounding yes, which is quite exciting for some of us to say we've got a budget speech here that from a get-go, even as it sets out its allocations, and speaks about the same economic priorities that are set out in the NSDP 2. So you're already seeing those linkages. We're talking about the productive sectors. We're talking about agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, technology and innovation. And these are defined in this plan, in fact, in this budget, to say these are our key growth sectors. So there's an alignment to that. And it's interesting to see. And hopefully as we delve deeper into the numbers, one, we won't bore our trailblazer, but two, we'll get to see that alignment. We'll try and draw those comparisons between what is captured within the NSDP 2 and what we have in the budget.
Sure. And talking about that alignment and where we are, without boring the fellow trailblazers with the numbers, let's maybe focus a bit more on the allocations, looking at the budget itself. I don't know where you want to start. You want to start with, let's maybe zone into some of the allocations so that if a trailblazer is watching this and they're in that specific space, they can unlock opportunities, or like you mentioned earlier on, they hold the key to unlocking those opportunities for themselves, So I don't know, what were some of the key highlights from the allocation part of the budget?
Sure. So at the risk of getting bogged down into the details, I would want us to take one step back. And get the direct linkages between the budget and the NSDP 2. And to say what are, first of all, before we get into the actual allocations, what are the priority sectors? Or in fact, not the priority sectors to speak, but what are economic priorities as captured in the NSDP 2 and as captured in the budget. And then we'll work our way down into the actual allocations.
Perfect. I'm happy with that.
So, great. So the first one that we'll have as, I think it's KPA 1, Key Performance Area 1 in the NSDP 2, speaks about enhancing inclusive, sustainable, economic, and private sector-led job creation. You recall we spoke about private sector-led job creation when we started our conversation. That's the first key performance area, right? So there are a number of intermediate outcomes that are targeted in each and every one of these, but we won't get bogged down into those for today's conversation. And then the second one would be about strengthening human capital, right? The third would be around building enabling infrastructure. I'd indicated that what you get from the theme is to say, as government, we are a facilitator. So they're saying even in terms of the infrastructure that we need to be building, it should be enabling. It shouldn't be the main attraction, but it should be the reason why you come and shine as private sector. And then the fourth would be strengthening national governance and accountability systems. We all know that, and I think it's also part of what they talk about in the budget to say, we need to make sure that our spending is efficient, for one. We minimize any leakages. And so this part of what this is speaks to that, to say we make sure that we've got the right governance structures in place and accountability systems in place.
Sure.
So I think that just lays a groundwork to say, okay, we've got this economic priorities. These are the areas. Now, where is the money?
Where is the money? Which is the big question.
Sure.
Where is this money? Or where's the money going?
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. I hope before we end the conversation, to your point around, I'll go back to this quote that you were mentioning by Cornelius around, if you act without planning, that's a very fatal exercise. But if you act without planning, that's a futile exercise. So it would be important for us to try and get a sense whether, at least from last year's, it may be early days, but to see whether the current government is doing some of the walking that they're talking, right? So I'll also want to touch on that just slightly. But let's speak to what we're at now in terms of allocations. So the first alignment that we're seeing in terms of the alignment between this NSDP2 and the budget is that the budget itself is defined, in fact, from the speech according to those key performance areas. So the first one, as we mentioned, is inclusive and sustainable economic growth and private sector led job creation. That has a budget of about 2.1 billion. And then we'll get maybe deeper into ministerial where it's a bit more intuitive. And then you look at where we're looking to strengthen human capital. The government is looking to spend about 9.1 billion. When we look at building enabling infrastructure, we're looking at about 4 billion. And finally, in terms of strengthening our national governance and accountability systems, we're looking at about 4.3 billion.
Big numbers.
Very, very big numbers. You know, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking, is this millions?
Billions.
You're looking at billions. So I don't know. I don't want to hijack your conversation. We're talking about big numbers, but are they really big? And what do they mean? I know that there's this thing that says, what's the thief of joy? The comparison? Something like that. Probably comparison is a thief of joy. So you shouldn't be looking at what the Joneses are doing. Because then you
stop comparing yourself to the Mphanas. Focus on your own lane.
Sure. So, but in this case, there's something that I wanted to do, and I think we've gone about it toe to head, because we needed to bring context into the numbers that we're speaking about of 2024, 2025. Which would be the numbers in 2023, 2024. Just for context, right? And if you can indulge me there,
please continue.
And I can go to some of these. Where did I want to go?
2023, 2024.
2023, 2024. Okay. So, no, I'm losing my train of thought. So, because I want us to build a picture that I can follow, and that whoever's listening to this or watching this can also follow.
All right. So in terms of the allocations, looking at the allocations, what do they look like? You don't have to go through all of them. Maybe there's one or two that are key, especially for the Trailblazer community.
Okay. So I think it's important that as we look at the budget, let's have first a bird's eye view. Now, what does it look like? What does the country's income statement look like? First of all, in terms of revenue, the government is looking to raise or to gain about 27.7 billion. And then in terms of expenditure, they're looking to spend, interestingly, 28.8 billion, which is about 1 billion or 1.1 billion more than they're going to gain. Breaking down that expenditure in terms of recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure, with recurrent being your operations, your salaries, your fuel, your day-to-day expenses. They're looking to spend about 19.1 billion, which is about 2/3 of the expenditure. And they're looking to spend about 9.7 billion, which is about 1/3 of that total expenditure. So from that balance sheet perspective, what we are going to be left with is a fiscal deficit or a financial deficit of about 1 billion. And if we want to put that deficit into context in terms of our GDP, that's about 2.5%. I failed to mention this a bit earlier. In fact, I'll probably mention this more towards our closing in terms of where the government is trying to go, whether that 2.5% deficit to GDP is good or bad. So I'll just leave that for now. Sure. So in terms of the actual allocations, I also just want to highlight, broadly speaking, where is the most money going? And I'll talk about where mostly my interest in lies, which is in CapEx or capital expenditure. So in terms of overall budget total expenditure, you're going to see that most of the money is going to go to the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning. About 4.4 billion is going to go there. You have health, which is about 3.4 billion. To service the debt that we currently have, about 3.1 billion is going to be used there. For education and training, 2.8 billion. Local government, chieftainship, home affairs, and police, that's about 2.2 billion. And we also have another 2.2 billion going towards natural resources. We did say that overall, what the government is looking to spend is about 29.2 billion. So in terms of the ministries that we're looking at, and for where I'm interested in terms of capital expenditure, where we're looking to realize growth, we see that natural resources has the highest allocation at about 1.9 billion. Again, finance and development planning, you see it there with 1.6 billion. Public works and transport, which is interesting, about 1.2 billion. Health, 1.2 billion. Energy, 1.1 billion. And agriculture, I know a lot of people are interested in agriculture. Agriculture, food security, nutrition. Overall, they've been given about 1.3 billion. But what's going to go towards capital expenditure is about 0.8 billion or about 800 million. So you're looking at about 9.7 billion that's going towards capital expenditure. Or if you were to look at it in your personal finance context, that's going towards productive expenditure, buying your textbooks, paying for your tuition, all of those kind of things, as opposed to going to Bar One or Cuban Links or wherever you do go over your weekends.
Sure.
All
right, cool. So with that context in mind, what, in your view, is, not even just in your view and also from the budget, what is the government actually trying to do with this plan?
Sure.
With this budget?
So the government has what they've termed a medium-term fiscal strategy. it's very similar to what you and I try and do. In fact, anyone else tries to do out there. What we all try to do is to increase our income and also try to minimize our wasteful expenditure. So that's what we are trying to do. So in the case of government, what they've done, first of all, they've set themselves some thresholds or some limits to say, look, as we go about our business, there's a few things that we can't do. They've set limits in terms of two fronts. One, they're saying fiscal deficit. You remember I said the current budget for 2024-2025, we're looking at a fiscal deficit of about 2.5%. So they're saying at no point should that deficit be above 3%.
Sure.
So in this case, we can give them a tick there. And then the next part is they're saying, look, we want our debt to GDP ratio. That one again, GDP. We want our debt to GDP ratio to be no less, or in fact, no more than 60%. Why is this important? Because just like you and I, creditworthiness is important. So your debt to GDP ratio is an indicator in terms of how we may perceive your ability to repay the debt that you're going to look for in future. So they're saying they don't want that to be more than 60% of their GDP, which is, or 60% of their net worth, if you go with our analogy that we used a bit earlier. Now it's important. What's important is that they've introduced what they call a medium-term expenditure framework. What they're trying to do with that, they're saying, as we budget, we shouldn't just be looking at our budget only from a one-year perspective, which is what typically used to be the case. But now we're looking at it more from on a 3-year perspective. What are we trying to achieve in alignment to our overall goals? So you may find them spending or under allocating in one sector this year because they know that in a subsequent year, that which they will have spent on lays a foundation for what they'll then spend on in future. So you've got a budget now that's more forward-looking and that's more smart or strategic in terms of how it's laid out, which looks at about a 3 to 5 year period in what it is trying to do. The next thing that they're trying to do, which is very important, is they are trying to improve efficiencies in terms of their revenue collection. And what they're also trying to do is to make sure that the percentage of the expenditure that goes towards capital spending becomes a significant portion or increases from where it's currently sitting. So I think what they're trying to do, if I'll just add to that, looking at my notes here, in terms of revenue, it's important that we grow our base. You always say get multiple income streams. Don't be a slave to a salary or something like that. So the government also has a couple of strategies in which they're trying to grow their revenue base. So revenue in the case of a business is not necessarily what they've sold and then someone is paid, but it's just any money that comes in, that's revenue.
Sure.
So what they're looking to do there, the first one is what they've called, they want to undertake a digitization project, which is going to do what's called a fiscalization of VAT and other taxes, which is a very complicated way of saying they just want to make sure that as a business, all your taxes are automated in terms of reporting to the RSL. That's what they're going to do, so that there are no leakages in between. And then the next part is they're trying to come up with innovative and new financing programs that they can use to finance infrastructure projects or critical development projects. Interestingly, there's something that I see that they're looking to review the oil levy. So they're trying to make sure that they get as much money as possible. They want to review the motor vehicle assurance, and they're working on the MVA bill. I hope, I don't know, that this at some point speaks to maybe a those roadside, road accident fund that we see in SA, so that I can also get a couple of millions if a car
And hopefully
stops.
not blow it.
And hopefully not blow it. But unfortunately, from an expenditure front, the government is quite firm in terms of what they are trying to do. They're very clear that they are going to embark on a hiring freeze. if these are not critical functions. They're also going to be looking at restructuring the ministries, the departments, the agencies, to make sure that any redundant functions are also eliminated. They'll be working on a voluntary separation package.
I saw that. Yes. I really saw that. And in my line of work, that was quite scary. Important, but scary, simply because I've done a lot of workshops or trainings where people were being retrenched. So, and the takeaway from that was people are highly indebted, they have no savings, and they had not anticipated for that. So when I saw that in the budget speech, my heartbeat almost went out of control.
So it's interesting because I looked at it differently. I looked at it from a point of if I'm a civil servant and I've been working in government for a long time, and I've got this brilliant business idea that I want to start, and I've been thinking of jumping ship, but I don't know if what I have in the coffers or in my savings is big enough. Now there's an opportunity to say, look, because government is driving this initiative of trying to get more people to leave, I'm likely to get more than what I've accumulated in the savings package.
I love that perspective.
So that's the way I looked at it.
I love that perspective. Yeah. Interesting. But the reality is, it is what it is. It is what it is. No, but I love that perspective.
But I think there's also an undertone in the budget about there are going to be difficult decisions to be made. It's very similar. So it's strikingly similar to say a budget for a country and your personal budget or your household budget. You still have difficult decisions to make. You can't, because you don't have infinite resources as an individual or as a household. You're not going to budget for the best school or one of these fancy expensive schools, and also holiday trips all over the place.
Live in a mansion.
Drive the best car, wear the best clothes. Something has to give.
Yeah, something has to give.
Something has to give. So as you always teach trailblazers and as well as your clients, there's somewhere where you have to make tough decisions. You're going to have to cut expenditure somewhere. And this government, what it has done is that it has identified that, look, we're spending way too much in terms of our wage bill. In fact, they've got a target of saying in terms of GDP, they are looking to get their wage bill from, I think it's about 18.5% to something like about 14%. So if you look at what the government is paying in terms of paying its employees as a percentage of its total expenditure, that sits at around 30%. So if you cut there but become more efficient, you're going to get an economy that's going to be more efficient, but you're also going to have less costs. So that's maybe a place where you'd want to play. It's a tough place. It's also not very popular because remember, these are also the people that put us or put whoever is in government at the end of the day. So it's a very difficult call from the government.
All right.
Sure.
So wrapping up the conversation.
Sure.
There's a trailblazer who is listening to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts, or watching it on YouTube, or even listen to it on YouTube. We've been going on for about almost an hour now, which is great because these are important conversations.
Sure.
Why should they care? What does it mean to them? What now?
So
how does it affect my wallet?
Sure.
So
there are interesting aspects. How does it affect you and how does it affect your wallet? I'll take a friend of mine who lives in SA. I've got a friend who lives in SA and who a couple of years ago did not have a generator at the house. Went to work, operated at work. Now they're told, you know what, because of COVID, we realize that people can work from home or they can work remotely. 2 days out of a week, you can work from home. But unfortunately, now those people, the same person is experiencing stage 6 and stage 8 load shedding, which pretty much says you're in the dark for most of the day. And we all know that what happens in SA, as what happens in the US, happens to all of us. What happens in SA might just leach into us. A lot of us may be worried about and what's going to happen to us. We know that some of our electricity we get from Eskom. How that's possible, some of us are still wondering whether if Eskom can't have enough to put lights on for their own people, how are we doing? And should we be expecting load shedding, right? And so if we are to experience load shedding, that's going to affect your wallet, because now you're going to have to find yourself buying a generator. Or if you've got an electric stove at your house, you may need to consider buying a gas stove in your house. So I think it's important that as we look at the allocations, one, fortunately, this is a bit of good news from what the government has been saying. The Minister of Energy is quite excited about this. A bit too overexcited in that they are looking to say, in fact, that's the territory that I won't venture into, where we're looking to become a net exporter. But just to paint a picture in terms of energy of where we're looking at and why we should or we shouldn't worry, and why I say we shouldn't worry. If we look at our energy needs as a country at the moment, during peak, which typically happens in the winter, when all our electric blankets are on, our heaters are on, and we leave the aircons at our offices on the whole night. We're looking at peak energy demand, which is sitting at about 203 megawatts. These are interesting numbers. When I listen to the SA minister, I always find interesting. How much are 203 megawatts? I don't know still, but what's important is the context. To say we're looking at peak demand, the country requires 203 megawatts of energy. Now, as a country, currently, we are producing 102 megawatts. Right? We've got some about 72 megawatts from Muela. We've got a solar plant in Mafeteng and Ramarotole, which gives us about 30 megawatts. There's about 0.5 megawatts in Katse, and a little bit something in Simonko. So what currently we are short of about 101 megawatts, which is about 50%. And so how are we currently financing that or funding that? We're getting about 60% of that is from Eskom, and about 40% is from Mozambique. But in the current year that we're sitting in, the government looks to generate an additional 71 megawatts. This is from local power generation from Ramarotole phase 2. That's going to generate about 50 megawatts. We're looking at Katse as well as a couple of other independent power producers, which gives us about another 20 megawatts. So if you're in the energy space, you know that the government is looking for you to say you should come and add into what the main grid.
How does that affect my wallet as a trailblazer? In the last 2 minutes before we have a power cut, literally power cut.
So it means that you probably don't need to buy a generator.
Okay.
that's the short of it. So government has got us sorted.
Okay, cool. Yes. So I've been watching this episode as a trailblazer, and I've been intrigued. Sure. A budget is important, households, government, and all of that. Closing remarks.
So I hope this conversation. So this is not a replacement of the budget speech. I hope what this conversation does is to try and demystify the budget, try and make it less scary, and try and encourage you as a trailblazer to go and get yourself a copy and get into the details of it. And hopefully in the comment section of wherever this is, let's have a conversation about this is what you are seeing. What we wanted to speak about, what we are seeing in terms of trade and industry. We haven't even spoken about Compact 2 yet, which is bringing about $300 million US when it enters into force in March this year. So there's so many different opportunities there. There's other projects around coffee where fellow trailblazers really can get insights and can get financial support to get their businesses or business ideas supported from a financial and business development perspective, and so that they become very, very active citizens in our country. There's talks about commercializing agriculture to move those of us that are still in subsistence to get us in that threshold. If you look at this budget, there's not a lot of money that's been put towards tourism. Why? Because what they're saying is tourism as a ministry their job is to facilitate. Private sector has to be coming up with all these activities. What they are identifying is that people are not spending enough time in the country. We need to make them spend more time. What we need is at all of these tourist hotspots, have more activities. And now private sector and you and I as individuals have to come up with those ideas, whether it is water sports, as people are always talking about, whether it's zip lines, anything that is in that space. Fortunately, you know that there are programs in place to support you in those ventures. And that is great for your wallet as a trailblazer.
Oh, that is great for your wallet indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been chatting to the one and only Mr. Teboho Mphana. He's an investment analyst, and he's not an economist as per the disclaimers. If you've been listening to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, please feel free to leave a review, ask your questions, and of course, we will direct them to myself and to him to address so that we can get the conversation started. Hey, I don't know anything. A lot of things. I know a lot of things, but not a lot of things. Not everything, actually. And of course, if you've been watching this on YouTube, leave a comment below, give it a thumbs up, share it with somebody who might benefit from it as well, and let us know what you really think about the budget speech. How are you managing your own personal finances, and how does the budget speech at a national level affect or impact your own individual finances? All right. So there is a blog post. I think I'll convert this into a blog post as well, so that if you want to read, if you want to listen to it, or you want to watch it, there's a lot of content, because content is king and queen in 2024. Of course, do follow us on all social media platforms, Tukiso, TK, and Tebe. And of course, this episode was sponsored by TKO Financial Wellness and Advisory. If you don't know what that is, we will link a video somewhere in this episode to give you a bit of insights of what the company is. A big shout out to my absolutely amazing guest and trailblazer. This was a very insightful conversation.
Thank you for having me finally.
Yeah, he's also an accountability partner. He does a lot of things that keep me in check. But anyway, a big shout out to Bay at the back. Baby's also here, so shout out to her as well. You know, when they say couple goals, he's not here alone. There's a beautiful spouse,
Did I mention I'm married?
I think you did, yeah. Okay. And you were told what to say. Happily married. A big shout out to my team. It's also photography behind the lens for putting in the hard work. And of course, the one and only Biza Streets. He's always in the streets. See what I did there? For the audio on the podcast. And a big shout out to you, the trailblazers, who keep making this episode amazing and incredible. For all the corporate sponsors, this is where you need to be directing your money. You know, when we speak about tourism, there's a channel called Escapes with TK, travel and tourism related content. And of course, all the banks, pension funds, financial services industry, investment, asset managers. This is where you want to put your money in for these kind of conversations. Put your money here and invest in the podcast, so that we can grow and reach a wider audience and drive financial literacy in the country. Central Bank of Lesotho, we see you too. Cheers, guys. Until the next video, love, peace, and money. Good night. Signing out.